The age of broken things. A Hoover held together by spite. Yesterday, my vacuum cleaner broke. Not dramatically, no sparks or smoke, no smell like electrified bacon, nothing so generous. The handle snapped off, that was it. 5 years of domestic service, and then the one part of the machine you actually need to hold it detached itself from the rest like it had finally lost faith in the arrangement. So I did what people do. I reached for duct tape. I wrapped it, pressed it together, applied optimism, applied denial, used that modern form of prayer where you try to keep an object going for one more week because the alternative is admitting you've entered the marketplace again. And for a short while it worked. Not well and not with any dignity, but enough to preserve the fiction, and then I had an annoying thought. The vacuum cleaner had stopped being a vacuum cleaner and become an argument. Because what I suddenly realised was this: I couldn't properly repair it. Not really. You can't get parts for it, there's no obvious repair path, no hidden economy of maintenance waiting in the wings, no quiet local repairman standing by with a screwdriver and a tray of components. It sucked, in both senses. It had reached the end of its permitted life, not its actual life, but its permitted life, and that's a nastier thing. Machines have always broken. Wear and tear is older than capitalism and will probably outlast it, which is discouraging. Things fail, springs weaken, plastic cracks, motors die, seals go, metal gets tired. Human beings get annoyed. That part isn't new. What's changed is what broken now means. It used to mean this thing has failed for the moment. Now it usually means this thing has reached the end of the short period in which the market was willing to support its continued existence. That's worse. Because when I was a kid, there was a television repair shop down the road. It was normal. If your TV went on the blink, somebody fixed it. If the fridge packed in, somebody fixed it. The Hoover, the toaster, the mixer, whatever it was, broken didn't automatically mean dead. It meant interrupted. It meant the object had dropped out of service for a while and with luck and skill, might be brought back to useful life. And there was a whole world built around that assumption: shops, skills, parts, trades. Nothing romantic about it. It wasn't a golden age of kindly men in brown overalls murmuring over cathode ray tubes. But it was a real world, and it rested on a very simple idea: that things are supposed to remain useful. If an object failed, the first question was not, what shall I buy next? It was, can it be fixed? And gradually that world was dismantled, not all at once, not with a manifesto, but by attrition. Cheap goods helped do it, so did sealed units, so did offshore manufacturing and lower margins. So did the basic arithmetic of the thing, because if a new vacuum cleaner costs less than a proper repair, most people will buy the new vacuum cleaner. Not because they're morally weak, because they're busy, because money matters, because time matters. Because once repair is made awkward enough, expensive enough, uncertain enough and inconvenient enough, replacement feels sensible. That's how a culture changes, not just through ideas, through friction. Remove one option slowly enough and eventually the other ones start to look like common sense. So repair didn't die naturally, it was priced out, designed out and then forgotten. And once that happens, something odd follows. Repair starts to look like an eccentric little hobby, a moral stance, a personality type. It ends up living mostly on YouTube, performed by men with magnifying lamps, unusual screwdrivers, and the sort of patience that makes the rest of us feel under-equipped. The idea that ordinary household life should still contain a world of repair is gone. And that matters because durability is not some lost magical art. We definitely know how to make durable things. A hammer can outlive its owner. A solid table can survive generations. A cast iron pan can stay alive longer than some marriages. A good tool can be passed down. Durability isn't mysterious. The problem isn't that permanence is impossible. The problem is that permanence is commercially inconvenient. A thing that lasts too well becomes, from the point of view of capital, very uncooperative. It stops circulating, stops feeding the machine, which brings us to the old phrase, planned obsolescence. That's a phrase that sounds like it was invented by a man in corduroy in 1974 while he was stirring instant coffee with his pipe. But the thing itself is real. The textbook example is the Phoebus cartel. Light bulb manufacturers in the 1920s all got together and agreed on a standard light bulb life of around 1,000 hours. Any longer, and the cartel fined whichever member broke their rule. So just pause on that. Not failure by accident, not failure because better engineering was impossible. Longevity itself became a problem. This is elegant in a vile kind of way, because it tells you something important. Capitalism doesn't merely respond to failure, it manufactures it. Or rather, it can manufacture limits. There are basically two ways to kill an object. The first one is obvious, you make it fail. Or if you want to be a little more refined about it, you make it unrepairable, hard to open, impossible to service, hard to support. You seal it shut, hide the workings, and withdraw the parts. Make labour too expensive, make replacement cheap. The object may well work perfectly for a while, it may even seem decent, but it has no respectable old age ahead of it, no future in which it can be restored or in which it can be handed down. No future where it becomes shabby but still useful and therefore oddly enough more lovable. It has youth, middle age, and then a cliff. That's designed obsolescence. You don't make the thing stop working, you make the owner stop wanting it. That's what I've called desirability obsolescence. The object still functions, but socially, symbolically, psychologically, it's dead. It looks dated, feels stale, makes its owner appear slightly behind, slightly less current, less aligned with the latest approved version of being a person. General Motors helped turn this into a system with annual car restyling. Last year's car was made to look old before it had become useless. That's the move. Not waiting for decay, getting there first at the level of image. Fashion has always done this, but modern consumer culture spreads it everywhere. Cars, phones, shoes, kitchens, furniture, interfaces, bathrooms, entire homes. So those are the two methods. Kill the object materially or kill it symbolically. And this is where Guy Debord wanders in like a disapproving French ghost. Debord was interested in spectacle, in the way modern life gets organised through appearances, images and performance, which kind of sounds faintly overdressed, but the practical point is simple. Objects are no longer just objects. They arrive trailing meanings. A phone isn't just a phone, it's taste, relevance, status, smoothness, modernity. A tiny public referendum on whether you are still the acceptable version of yourself. A coat isn't just a coat, it's class, presentation. Whether you look like someone who's quietly given up and now just buys beige things in despair. And trainers have a metaphysics all of their own. And once objects start doing identity work as well as practical work, obsolescence no longer needs to be physical, it can be social. The object dies first as an image long before it stops functioning. It stops performing the right kind of self for its owner, and once that happens, replacement no longer feels like waste. It feels like upkeep, personal maintenance, and that really is one of the nastier achievements of the system. It's one thing to make a machine wear out, it's quite another to make the owner experience its use as a kind of social decline. That is clever and it is definitely vile, because it means perfectly usable things can become emotionally impossible to keep, not because they fail, but because they embarrass. The obvious example is the smartphone, because the smartphone sits at the crossroads of utility, status, and low-grade psychological warfare. It's a tool, a camera, a map, a wallet, a work device, a diary, a social pass, a communications terminal, and a shrine to self-management. So the phone in your hand isn't just a device, it's a small referendum on whether you're still modern. And modern obsolescence doesn't require drama. The battery only needs to be slightly worse, the interface slightly slower, storage slightly tighter, updates slightly heavier, or the camera less impressive when the new adverts begin. That's enough. The device doesn't need to become rubbish, it only needs to become slightly tiresome, slightly beneath your dignity. The Apple battery throttling row was useful, not because it proved some cartoon theory about executives in a candlelit room cackling over handsets. It was useful because it showed how obsolescence now works, technically, quietly. Opacity wrapped in plausible deniability. The device doesn't need to die, it only needs to become faintly irritating. And then one day, last year's phone begins to feel as though it belongs to a diminished version of yourself. That's a trick. Not simply making things fail, teaching people to feel faintly degraded by keeping perfectly usable ones. You see the same thing with cars, not only because modern cars are packed with sealed electronics and expensive diagnostics, though they are, but because the car industry long ago grasped that transport is only half the story. A car still runs, still passes its MOT, still gets you to where you need to go. But then the shape changes, the lights narrow, the grille becomes more aggressive or more premium, the dashboard has a screen, then several screens, and then a sort of glowing command centre for someone who just wants to go to B&Q. And suddenly, your perfectly functional vehicle is no longer merely transport, it's last decade's idea of yourself. That's desirability obsolescence. And it spreads well beyond technology. Kitchen trends, furniture trends, flooring trends, paint colours. The endless humiliation of being told that an object in your home that's functioning perfectly well is now unacceptable because it's oak or grey or too glossy or not glossy enough or offensively minimal or whatever aesthetic religion has taken hold this quarter. Entire industries survive by making the merely unfashionable feel somehow suspect. But software is when the whole thing becomes properly grubby, because software doesn't just wear out objects or shame owners, it's hollowed out ownership itself. You used to buy Photoshop, it came in a box with a disk. There was a version number, you bought it, installed it, and it was yours in the ordinary human sense of the word. You could use it for years, you could ignore updates, skip upgrades, remain loyally attached to some elderly version because it still did exactly what you needed and didn't yet contain 11 panels that no sane person ever asks for. And then someone had a bright idea. Why sell a tool once when you can charge for access indefinitely? And the subscription model arrived, dressed up as convenience. So now you don't own Photoshop, you rent access to it. Miss a payment and the nature of the relationship changes immediately. Your software may still sit on your machine, your files may be yours, your work may be yours, your livelihood may depend on it, but your right to use the tool depends on an ongoing financial arrangement. That's not ownership, it's license dependency. And this is where someone called Ivan Illich becomes really useful. He was an Austrian priest, social critic and philosopher. He cared about tools, about whether they expanded human freedom or reduced it. His argument, stripped of the more ecclesiastical furniture, is that good tools enlarge autonomy. They let people act, make and mend, to move through the world with greater competence. Bad tools do the opposite. They shift agency away from the user and towards institutions, remote structures, experts, platforms and permissions. Which is exactly why subscription software feels so disempowering. The problem's not only the price, it's the relationship. The tool's no longer fully in your hands. It's tied to a login, a billing system, a license, a server somewhere else. A corporation that reserves the right to alter the terms on which you work. You may use it every day, you may make your living through it, but it remains theirs. And once you notice that relationship, you start seeing it everywhere. Cloud storage, it's a lovely phrase. It makes it sound as if your files are floating safely in a heavenly puff of benevolent vapour. What it actually means is that your work sits inside someone else's infrastructure under terms you didn't write and can't negotiate. Streaming is the same. You don't own the film, you access it. until the license changes, until the platform moves it or the rights expire. Until it vanishes into a premium tier or a corporate tantrum. Music is the same. Books are increasingly the same. Software suites, remote authentication, digital ecosystems, smart devices with the afterlives in the small print. We're told this is flexibility, modernity, convenience, the freedom of the cloud. Another way of describing this same thing is, ownership has been hollowed out. We increasingly do not possess things, we access them conditionally and temporarily on shifting terms set elsewhere. And that's why this is bigger than my broken Hoover. The Hoover is just a small, stupid domestic version of a much larger arrangement. First they made products disposable, then they made ownership disposable too. And that's the real move. The tool remains theirs, what you own is the bill. And yes, people will say this is simply how modern complexity works, that contemporary tools are too integrated, too software dependent, too sophisticated to exist in the old blunt way. And while there's some truth in that, there's not enough. Because complexity has also become an alibi, a way of telling people that opacity is inevitable, dependence is normal, and local control is some kind of childish nostalgia. And I don't think that story is innocent, because what vanishes once you accept it is not merely repair, it's agency. The sense that things around you are stably there, that they can be understood, opened, held, fixed, relied on. And this is where Gunther Anders helps. He wrote about the mismatch between human beings and the giant technical systems they create, but can no longer grasp. This sounds a bit grand for a discussion that began with my snapped Hoover handle, but the feeling he points to is ordinary now. It's the feeling that things around you are there, but not solidly there. They function, but conditionally. They belong to you with asterisks. They remain available only so long as the chain of invisible permissions continues to hold. My phrase for this is ontological insecurity. Yes, it's pompous, but it's not wrong. All it really means is this: you no longer feel fully sure what is yours, what will remain accessible, what can be fixed, what can be opened, what will still function next year, and what will vanish behind a paywall, or what will stop being supported. These things only continue as long as the systems you don't control permit it. The objects around you no longer feel stable in their being. They are present but precarious, yours but not quite, real but contingent. The Hoover can't be repaired, the software can't be owned, the file sits in a cloud you don't control, the phone in your hand is already being replaced in the imagination before it's even begun to fail. So the object is weakened 3 times over, physically, socially, ontologically. And once you see that, a lot of modern irritation stops looking accidental. This is not merely a world in which things happen to break. It's a world arranged to make breakage profitable, to make replacement feel normal, to make dependence feel sleek, and ownership increasingly theoretical. That's quite an achievement, and a nasty one. Capitalism no longer waits for things to die, it kills them socially first. And yes, of course I bought a new Hoover, because I live here too. Because once the repair culture is dead and the parts are gone and the economics are absurd, there comes a point where critique ends and Argos begins. And that's part of the point. Most people aren't consenting to this world in some deep ideological sense. They're navigating it, they're improvising within it, replacing what cannot be repaired, paying subscriptions because the work has to be done, accepting opaque systems because the alternative to leaving this normal economic life is to start carving wooden spoons in a shed. So this isn't a sermon about personal virtue, it's not me telling you to keep a 2015 smartphone alive with bale twine and moral grandeur. It's about structure. It's about the way the world is now organised against duration, against maintenance, against stable possession. It denies the durable relationship between person and thing. We are told constantly that the new economy is frictionless, but that's only because the friction has been moved. It's no longer in the object, it's in you. You absorb the hassle, you absorb the cost. You absorb the low-level hum of never quite knowing whether the thing you depend on will still be there on the same terms next month. That's where the friction went. And that's why the broken Hoover annoyed me more than it should have done. Because it wasn't just a busted appliance. It was a reminder that we live in an age of broken things. And not only broken things, broken continuity, broken ownership, and broken confidence that the world around us is made to remain in human hands. The old promise of industrial society was abundance. The new promise seems to be access, temporary access, conditional access, subscription access. Access as long as your password works, your card clears, the server stays up and the terms don't change in the night. That's a much poorer promise, and once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. In the phone upgrade cycle, in the smart television that becomes stupid the minute support ends, in the e-book you can't lend, the film you cannot keep, and the tool you cannot own. All of it says the same thing. You may use this for now. That's the grammar of the age, and I think people should be more disturbed by it than they are. Because once you accept that in relation to objects, you start accepting it elsewhere as well. In work, housing, in services, in the infrastructure of daily life. Nothing stable, everything conditional, everything leased back to you from somewhere else. And it's not just an economic arrangement, it's a way of training people out of the idea that a thing should endure and belong and remain available in some solid, ordinary human sense. And that's why a snapped Hoover handle can become surprisingly philosophical, because it's small enough to see, a tiny domestic parable, an appliance held together by duct tape and denial, standing in for a whole civilization that's become very good at disguising dependency as convenience. So yes, I bought a new one. Of course I did. What else was I going to do? Write a sonnet to the death of repair culture while the carpet filled up with cat hair? That's the genius of the system. Even when you can see it clearly, we still have to live in it.